Kia ora koutou te whānau. My name is Chlöe Swarbrick.
And kia ora, I'm Green and Gareth Hughes.
And today we are given something a spin which we've been talking about for a little while now, which is to record many of the conversations that we just have typically in our offices. Right now it is 4:19.
4:20 just around the corner.
Almost, and I just want to say that it was not at all the intention to start the attempt at a pod at that point in time, but it just so happens, it's such a coincidence. I'm presently very sick, hence why I'm dressed like this. The house is currently sitting. For those who are listening, I'm dressed in a jumper. Gareth is dressed in a suit.
I've got to run down to the suits, down to the house.
Down to the suits.
And
you're
it's actually
suit
wrong
about
part. You have to wear a tie in the house, which I think is archaic. It must be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know how to tie a tie when I was a kid.
Really?
I could dangle off a building, I could climb buildings with ropes, but I did not know how to tie a tie.
I also had I personally cannot understand the purpose of ties. I feel like they're just a piece of material that men wear around their neck and actually serves no practical purpose whatsoever.
Well, the history, right, is a phallic symbol, but I guess
Really?
we have to talk about politics, not the history of ties.
No!
That's another
So,
podcast.
speaking to politics, I mean, I do think it's in the speaker's rulings, right? So, when we're talking about politics, what's recently been occurring, the week before last, the House finally rose at 3 p.m. on Saturday. We ran for over by, was it 24 or so hours in the budget process?
It was massive. So normally the House goes into urgency for budget, but it was a pretty long one, right? It was set into Saturday. Normally we rise on 6 p.m. on Thursday. Yeah. Well, we passed 8 bills, or introduced or passed 8 bills, which is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it just shows the amount of work that was behind the scenes and part of the budget. It was pretty hectic. Yeah. Well, I guess the big question was, is the budget a hack or not?
Is the budget a hack? Well, according to the press gallery, that's the question.
What do you think?
To be perfectly honest with you, I've not really paid that much attention to all of the news about this. I feel like this is the reason so many people turn off of politics, because it seems like it's just a bunch of silly buggers playing games. Based on what I've read from the Twitter commentary, it seems as though even if it wasn't a hack, it seems like it was just like 2,000 searches or whatever. It's the equivalent of basically seeing a document on somebody's desk outside their office and standing like behind the glass of their door and taking photos and zooming in and seeing what you can see there. So dubious, potentially unethical. I personally don't really care all too much. What's your take?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I remember once getting an OIA from the previous government, and they blacked
What's
out.
What's an OIA?
An Official Information Act request. It's kind of art, right? This one page was entirely blacked out. You couldn't see anything, but you could still press Control F for specific words and know exactly in the document where it was. Wow. So any officials watching this, you need to be aware of that.
We know how it works.
But the thing is, people actually care more about the substance.
Oh, totally.
It was such a sideshow, and everyone chased this thing, and I guess this is why I wanted to sit down and talk to you, because there's so much happening, but often you don't talk about the important things.
Totally.
And actually, like the 1.9 billion for mental health
and addiction.
I'm just really proud of that.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm glad that was the high level thing that came out of it.
Absolutely.
But there's so much other good things in the budget.
Oh, totally. I mean, on the 1.9 billion for mental health and addiction, it's been an ongoing process for us in caucus and for our MPs to work through that process to finally get that necessary chunk of money in the budget. It's within our confidence and supply agreement twofold. The first is to make sure that every New Zealander has access to timely and affordable mental health services. What that 1.9 actually translated into reality means that in the next 5 years, any New Zealander who walks into a GP or self-refers will have affordable access to mental health services wherever they are. And the other thing is obviously treating drugs as a health issue, including the referendum on cannabis, which we'll get to later.
Can I give a shout out to you though?
Yeah.
Because you have been like an absolute legend and a champion on this issue.
Or annoying. As the case may be. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, like 10 years older, and I'm of that generation where I was told boys don't cry, just harden up, man up, and there has been this paradigm shift, and you've been really honest about your challenges, and I just acknowledge that.
I appreciate that, mate. If I can acknowledge you, you're the chair of a select committee, the Social Services Select Committee.
And community.
And Social Services and Community Select Committee. What does that actually mean? But in the process of the budget, what does that mean that you've been doing recently?
Yeah, so it kind of flies beneath the radar, but it's really important work, and I think one of those foundational things of how our country operates and how and why we can be a successful country. What I mean is, like, I've recently been in Ethiopia, Turkey, Rwanda. You know, a lot of countries suffer from corruption. So one of our key roles is to scrutinise all government spending. To hold the government to account and actually ask the question, why was that money spent and was it spent effectively? So on my committee, you know, we had Ministry of Social Development, Oranga Tamariki, all the housing stuff. So literally tens of billions of dollars. And it's a chance for the Parliament to hold the government to account. So what we've been doing is having ministers in. Just this morning we had Minister Twyford in, so of course Judith Collins came to the committee. There was a lot of fireworks, entertainment.
I'm loving it.
Yeah, she's got this whole nice
I love it when she stands up in the House and asks a question nowadays, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I love you, Juco 2020. Not for Prime Minister, but for Leader of the National Party.
Yeah, but it's a cool process, and like people can follow it and actually see how their money's being spent. Thinking to the future, I wish it was actually longer. Because actually what we do is often talk about what's prominent in the media. I'd love to do what they do in Australia, which is really dig down into the detail of the line items of budgets. And maybe that's something we can think about in the future. Yeah,
I think the select committee process, as you say, is something which does largely fly under the radar. For people who've never engaged with a select committee before, typically what happens and how most people interact with them is when a bill is before select committee or if you've put forward a petition. So a bill, which is a proposed piece of legislation or law, will go through its first reading after it's been introduced to the House. If it passes by a simple majority or even bigger, then it goes to one of the select committees. There's about a dozen or so, which are all specialists, and they will then try and unpack and pull apart that law, make it as good as it possibly can be. If the politics doesn't get in the way, and then send it back to the House for second reading, committee of the whole House, and then third reading. And because we're still a constitutional monarchy, the Queen or the Governor-General has to sign it off. Speaking to the budget debate, which is currently raging in the House, people may not know this about Mr. Gareth Hughes, but he is our musterer. We in the Greens, one of our 4 charter principles is non-violence, so we don't have a whip. So we have a musterer. I happen to be our deputy musterer. But Gareth, as our musterer, can you explain what that means and how you facilitate our MPs to be in the chamber during the budget debate?
Yeah, well, I guess just to give a bit of background, other parties have whips, and the whole point is they're meant to whip their MPs to vote the right way. The Green Party, being peaceniks, decided to muster your politicians to vote. So on outside the door actually is a framed crook, like a shepherd's crook, and the idea is that's how I get our people to vote. But I guess I'm kind of like the eco-biofuel oil that greases the gears of the parliamentary operation. So it's like, here's in my pocket, because I keep an eye on exactly what's happening in the House. So I know exactly who's there, who's voting, we organise leave, things like that. So with the budget debate, what happens is after the budget is read, the leaders speak, and then there's a 17-hour debate where basically every MP can throw their 2 cents in on the budget. So what we've been doing this week is sort of managing who's speaking where, what are they going to be speaking about. It's epic, actually. Yeah,
that's one of the things which I actually had no idea about before I came into Parliament, is how much work is required to run the order of the House. So many people, when you post up a speech on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, will ask why the House is empty. And I've actually done a video on this before trying to explain it, but obviously you do something at one point and then you need to revisit it. And the reason that the chamber appears to be empty is because the House sits until 10 o'clock at night most nights, until 12 p.m. midnight 2 Fridays ago, and people are back in their offices doing busy work, or they've received leave from the musterer or the whip and are out talking to their constituents. So congrats for all of the work that you do managing our AMPs.
Well, it sort of flows beneath the radar, but it's kind of just has to be done.
Yeah.
And I mean, what I quite like is actually getting behind the scenes, and for me it's a great privilege of my job, is actually just seeing how Parliament works and how bills are made and how decisions are made leading up to bills. It was Otto von Bismarck, the old Prussian Chancellor, old mate. I mean, he said the 2 things you shouldn't see being made are laws and sausages. But I reckon it's fascinating, and it's cool as a Green, like to be participating in it. And we had a huge impact on the budget.
Oh, totally.
If you tote up all the Green wins, it was more than $4 billion towards a cleaner, fairer, smarter New Zealand.
Yeah, and I mean, I would even actually argue one of the reasons, or one of the many reasons that I joined the Greens was because of the very framing of well-being. It was Jeanette Fitzsimons who said in a speech just before she left Parliament that we currently have an economic system that exploits both people and the planet. And I've done a lot of reading about economics, and the thing that gets me about economics, about people who say, that the Nats are the best economic managers, what do we mean when we say that? Because economics, by definition, is literally just about the allocation of resources. And anybody who studied economics will know that there are dozens of different economic theories that you can apply to actually seek to predict things. All mainstream economists didn't predict the global financial crisis. But that rant aside, this budget, we looked at things, outcomes for society that went far beyond just GDP or gross domestic product. We looked at what's actually being delivered when the government's seeking to spend its money. And I'd say, in terms of economic management or allocation of resources, being focused on the outcomes for people on the planet has got to be far more sensible.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important, right? Because for decades we've followed chasing GDP, but like a car accident increases GDP.
Oh, totally.
The Rena oil spill increased GDP.
Madly.
People weren't better off.
I mean, madly, the Christchurch terrorist attack increased GDP. If we can't see how flawed of a measure that is by virtue of something like that, we're lost.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why it was so cool, the ideas that the Greens have been talking about for so long was sort of baked into the heart of the budget. And I don't think we'll go back to it.
Have we gone mainstream, Gareth?
Have we gone mainstream? You tell us.
Yeah.
But I guess something that came out of the budget, but was a huge truckload of money, or a super Hercules full of money, was the $20 billion.
I can tell you're a dad. Yeah.
But this $20 billion defence spending, what's your sort of take on it?
20 billion.
For the new defence capability
$20 billion. That is 10 times the budget that we're spending on mental health and addiction, and that was quite a long journey to get to that $1.9 billion for mental health and addiction. So, I mean, I'm in two minds about it. I feel that this money, personally, I feel that this money could be better spent. I think most people looking at $20 billion would be galled at it, because it's so massive that it's abstract. But I also think that it is important that we do have the machinery to participate in peacemaking.
Yeah, I'm the same actually. I'm in total two minds, because a huge amount of money, and if we propose that, say, for
climate change,
it would be seen as fantasy and unrealistic. I mean, I did a mental calculation, because I love energy.
Yeah.
If the government spent 200 million giving light bulbs, efficient light bulbs, LEDs to everyone, we would save 500 million within 6 months. I mean, why don't we do that? It seems there is a different way that money is spent when it comes to defence.
Oh, totally.
And I acknowledge we do need defence spending. I had the privilege of going one of the old Hercules when Murray McKelly was around.
Wow.
And it was a pretty cool experience. We were going to Pacific Islands, taking some food with us. But there was the other Air Force planes that continually broke down. And I know another one broke down last week.
Yeah.
I guess my big concern with it, though, is those Poseidon planes they're also buying, really they're submarine hunters. They've used the argument we're going to do maritime surveillance. Really, they're submarine hunters. Whose submarines are we trying to find?
Yeah, submarine hunting. It sounds very James Bond-esque.
Yeah. Whereas we could have got much cheaper or more maritime surveillance craft if we didn't go for the upgraded super submarine hunters.
Yeah, and I would say, speaking to one of our MPs, Gaura's Garaman, earlier today, she was in estimates hearings and speaking to Ron Mark, who's the Minister of Defence, New Zealand First MP, who's responsible for how this money is going to be spent. And he did say that part of the Defence Force capability will be gearing up towards climate mitigation. Yeah. So that's important, but also why is it that when we're talking about spending money on climate mitigation that we have to preface it with using it for defence spending to begin with?
Though I know there was $600 million of missiles, anti-ship and anti-air missiles.
Yeah.
That's not going to help when climate change hits, or as it's hitting now.
Well, I mean, if there is a resource war thereafter, but that's getting very dystopian and apocalyptic.
I guess the good news, though, is climate change is in there, which is awesome, and we are seeing our troops coming out of Iraq. Yeah. Which
is massive.
It was great work to Golras and the Greens, and I'm really stoked to see. Yeah, and the
decade. It was a decade. I grew up under, when George Bush was president in the US, and I remember the conversations that were happening at the time, the marches that were occurring growing up in in Auckland, down Queen Street, So yeah, big kudos to all of the peace campaigners who've really stuck their neck out and continued to advocate for that for a long time now. Meanwhile, being called hippies, you're mainstream now, that's how it works.
Well, I was living in Melbourne when that happened, and 1 million people marched to Melbourne. You can't call 1 million people all hippies or head in the sand people.
I mean, you can try. They've done that for a while now.
Do you reckon we've been proved right? Like, because it's been 18 years?
Yeah. I think that with most things, particularly on arguments around where we start to build the scientific consensus, such as with climate change, that ultimately, if you were to look at the Green Party in any other context, and I've had this discussion with people before at universities and actually even in retirement villages, where if the Greens were in any other context, like for example in the business context, if we were in Silicon Valley, we'd be the innovators and the disruptors, but because we operate in a soundbite media environment and this political landscape being what it is, adversarial, we can be sidelined and positioned as the crazy Greens. I just think that that's not particularly useful or constructive for developing the dialogue or moving society forward.
Yeah, I guess the thing that keeps me optimistic though is that society is moving forward.
Yeah.
And we are winning, I think.
Yeah.
Like, just this week as well, Auckland Council declared a climate emergency.
Yeah,
They've joined a bunch of other countries, a bunch of other councils. That's super cool.
I am so proud of my city, and I am also so proud of all of the incredible young people in particular who marched with the School Strike for Climate, calling for this, all of the amazing people involved in Extinction Rebellion. And what actually excites me about this declaration of a climate emergency is that it is actually demonstrating that we're part of a global movement.
Yeah.
So a lot of people for a long time in the narrative around climate action have said, oh, New Zealand's so small, we're 0.2% of world emissions. Well, actually, we are now seeing that we are playing a role. When New Zealand does something, it has a knock-on effect into allowing activists and campaigners in other countries to push their government to do the same. We help to set a precedent. It also means that we can take that to the negotiating and diplomatic table internationally. But yeah, also my incredible youth MP, Luke Weejohn, was there to help submit on behalf of School Strike for Climate. Cool. Yeah, it was rad. But it was also World Environment Day last week.
Yeah, how did you celebrate?
I didn't know about it, if I can be completely honest. And that's probably because we're in the thick of everything else going on. But speaking about World Environment Day and the fact that unfortunately kind of went under the radar, particularly in this place with everything else going on, what is Parliament doing when it comes to sustainability? I mean, you're also on a committee which is responsible for making all of these decisions.
Yeah, I won't bore people. It's called the Parliamentary Services Corporation.
Not boring.
It's cool actually, like compared to previous speakers, there's been zero movement, doing zero innovative things around Parliament. Trevor Mallard, to his credit, is doing some great stuff. So we're getting some veggie gardens coming in.
Wow.
There is finally sustainable composting on precinct, so we're not just throwing out our food waste, it's actually being used.
Yeah, and those people who are working in the kitchens in Parliament are finally earning a living wage.
That's right. We've finally got LED lights, which means we're not using as much inefficient products. Not in this building.
Okay.
Only in the beehive.
We're in Bowen House, which if people have seen it reported, we are in the building that is earthquake prone. So yeah, that's where the Greens have been put.
Come just watch this and see what happens. So they're rolling them out in here, which is cool. They're finally offsetting for parliamentary staff. I mean, the Greens, we've done it voluntarily for a decade. It's cool. Yeah. I wanted to pull you up on something. Yeah. Because you used that old line that John Key used to use, which is we're only 0.02% of emissions. What I always say though is we're the 5th highest per person emission emitters in the whole developed world. So
absolutely. It's
kind of like we're using an unfair share of the atmosphere to dump our waste and our pollution.
But that's why for me it's really important to see climate action as a social justice or social responsibility issue as well, because fundamentally if we come back to that argument that the economy or the notion of the economy is about distribution of resources, and if we talk about climate action, the wealthiest in societies across the world are using the majority of resources and emitting the majority of carbon, which changes the climate. The people who are suffering the brunt of climate change are among the poorest and the people who contribute the least to climate change. So that is why it's really crucial that we get the incentives right and also make sure that we're investing and buffering those people who haven't contributed to climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've told you this story, but it was actually on the Pacific trip with the Hercules. Yeah. We went to Kiribati, which is one of those most threatened countries, no more than a metre above sea level. And this tiny, heavily populated atoll, 60,000 people there. It's not a thing in the future for them. It's something they live daily because they see the seas coming up. Their crops are getting, the salt water's rising as well, so it's harder to grow crops. But like the big waves during king tides, they're actually washing over their crops now, and they've literally got nothing to build walls. So, in Wellington, they're spending half the regional council budget increase on building walls, but they can't do it. So they were literally building walls out of rubbish because it was the only thing they had. And I remember at the time, the minister of the previous government said, well, New Zealand's only a small source of emissions and, we're trying our best. And it felt so hard, and it was really hard to tell them. Yeah. So I feel really proud when I do go overseas now to actually have a good story, right? We're setting zero carbon targets, ended offshore oil exploration, we're investing in massive funding for public transport, walking and cycling, so we're actually doing more, which is great.
We're doing more in a lot of areas, including, we had it announced, I believe it was earlier this week, that the government is looking to ban live cattle exports. And this is something which you have been advocating for as our animal welfare, animal rights spokesperson.
Yeah, I don't know if people know about it, but basically we export tens of thousands of living animals from New Zealand every year.
Which seems archaic.
Well, it is, right? We're at the bottom of the world. Yeah. It's rough waters around
very far away from a lot of things.
But imagine boats, like there was one a couple of years ago, 50,000 sheep in one boat with 3,000 cows.
50,000 sheep?
And they only had a single vet to manage all those animals. I mean, there was a case years ago that stopped the export of live animals for slaughter, where a whole bunch of animals died as it basically was stuck in the Saudi Arabian waters. But what we've had is this loophole for many years, which allows it for breeding purposes. So a few years ago, we exported a whole bunch of cows to Sri Lanka, but basically a huge amount of them died. They were totally unsuited, they were totally unhealthy, full of diseases. So I remember hearing from a Sri Lankan farmer who said, well, I don't have a farm anymore, I've only got a cemetery. So it was terrible. And it's happened for years and years, and it's still happening today, but the government this week has announced a review with an aim to stopping it, which is fantastic. And actually there's going to be a rally at Parliament tomorrow on Friday to make sure it's the strongest possible ban.
That is awesome. So what is the argument for continuing with this? I saw something in the news, the National Party is opposing it.
Well, it's money basically. We make a few tens of millions of dollars of income, of export income from exporting these animals. I mean, there are also farmers that criticise it because why on earth are we sending our genetic stock, the animals we're investing in breeding to make
that we're supposedly so proud of,
we're exporting it to other countries. So it's simply a question of money. But for me, it's a question of morals and animal welfare, and it's cruel. But the other thing is that there's no way we can enforce that, and we need to follow suit.
Just trying to follow the logic there. So, but don't we supposedly have some of the highest animal welfare standards?
But when we export our animals around the world, we export to countries like Mexico, Saudi Arabia.
So if we were to implement that standard, then theoretically we actually probably wouldn't be able to export to anywhere anyway. Got it.
Yeah, but I mean, we have a responsibility, and I think it was Gandhi who said you can judge a society by the way it treats its animals, and we've got a long way to improve in New Zealand.
On one final thing on animal welfare, and this is just something that's not currently newsworthy, but it's been percolating, and I've been asked it by quite a few people, particularly younger people, is where are we at with sow crates?
Sow crates. Well, actually, it was the biggest petition in 5 years was issued to Parliament to ban sow crates. So if you don't know what they are, basically mother pigs, they're confined in these crates, which they literally can't turn around. They do it because we've bred these gigantic pigs, which can crush their sows, the piglets. So we lock them in cages, and basically they spend huge chunks of their lives because they're constantly impregnated, constantly pregnant, then feeding their babies, and they're locked in these tiny crates. So we've had a very clear policy, and I've been really clear to the Minister of Agriculture, we need to ban it straight away. There's alternative systems which are safer for the piglets. I think are actually going to increase the brand because people don't want to buy pork products from inhumane and I'd say cruel practices.
So the alternative, looking to the solution, is lots of happy cows and pigs and sheep and chickens all on open green fields.
Yep. Especially with eggs, and I guess a shout out for something I'm really stoked about that came out last week is there's a new egg tracing regime. So every egg that's going to be sold in New Zealand is now going to have a little label that says exactly how it was raised. So on the egg shell. It's sort of sustainable, non-toxic ink is going to be on the egg, and you'll know, is it free range?
It's like a fingerprint on the egg.
Yeah. But because what was happening was people were scamming it, getting caged eggs, putting it in a box that said free range, making extra money. And this way it's going to be almost impossible to try and hack.
Far out.
So,
like a fingerprint on your egg.
Keep an eye out for those free range eggs.
Is that happening on everything?
Yeah, it's tracemyeggs.co.nz.
Oh wow, okay. Okay, so it's an opt-in for producers.
No, all major producers have opted in.
Wow.
And it launched only last week.
Tracemyegg.co.nz. I feel like I'm advertising for them now. But other things going on this week included the old cannabis debate.
A certain someone called you, I think, naive for sharing your view. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I brush it off, to be honest. In terms of the naivety card, I've had that pulled on me a lot, but I also just think that it's not particularly constructive at all, which is why I offered to that certain someone to have someone who fits his demographic, i.e. an older dude, to come on, Benedict Fisher, who is an incredible scientist and researcher at the University of Auckland. He's their current head of addiction, so delves into that, to come on and to talk to him about the science. As I've said from the start, and the Greens have said for a long time, we are really interested here in having a debate about what is ultimately a very complex issue, that is of drug harm reduction. We know that it's always going to be something that results in people's emotions being flared up. I frequently have people throwing back at me that I haven't seen drug harm or whatever, and I just want to say, and they also tell me that I'm pro-cannabis or that I'm pro-drugs or whatever, and I just want to debunk all of that for the millionth time. I'm not pro-drugs, I'm not pro-cannabis, I am pro-sensible regulation that reduces harm in our communities. I have seen a lot of harm personally in my extended family and in my communities and former flatmates actually, from using and becoming dependent and addicted to certain substances.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real issue. I'm glad we're having the debate, but what that certain someone did was not actually have a debate.
No,
it was just a personal attack.
Yeah, well, it got. I mean, I'm not sure. So it was really fascinating. But it was a really fascinating. It definitely wasn't a debate. But it was a really fascinating line of conversation because I attempted to have to work through and tease out every piece of logic. And then there would be this sporadic jumping to the next point. Yeah. And I mean, I get that you've got a 7-minute radio slot, but then the response was subsequent to that because I didn't, it's just very much framed in this hyper-polarised, somebody's won or somebody's been destroyed or slammed, which is what I think we get out of YouTube debate culture, which is all about like picking your team and getting them to win. It's not about a meaningful, logical, evidence-based, rational discussion which respects both sides' humanity, God forbid.
Yeah.
But you also have kids, Gareth, and how old are you?
What am I, 37?
You're 37, have 2 children, that therefore, according to Mike Hosking, makes you qualified to have an opinion. What's your opinion?
Maybe, Mike, you can invite me on to so you can give me the points. But it's such a double standard, because, I mean, I was the baby of the house when I was first elected too, but I never got the...
Baby of the house, by the way, technical term. Baby of the house means youngest politician in Parliament.
And I never got that... kind of the ageism that you get.
Really?
Maybe it's because it's a female thing.
I think it might be gendered, because I remember actually Todd Barclay, former MP for Chlöe Southland, the guy who became embroiled in some drama last term, he was my age, and I never remember any commentary about him being unfit for the job as a result of his age. So I made the naive assessment a while ago when I was asked if I'd ever had anybody be sexist towards me, and I just kind of said, no, I don't think that I've encountered much sexism, but I do think it was the intersection of age and gender.
Because the only time I recall it was once questioning John Key. He was the only one that pulled it up that I can really remember, so I just think it sucks and it's got no place, and actually I think even like 16-year-olds have a huge amount to contribute to this debate.
Look at their leadership in the climate strike movement. Is Greta Thunberg 16? Do you want to clarify that, Jonathan? Jonathan has no idea. Helpful. Thanks, Jonathan.
But I mean, she should be, I think, the person of the year, actually. Yeah. The movement that she's inspired from just a personal action. Yeah. And, it was one day when Parliament wasn't sitting. A whole group of kids had just gathered, about 30 of them, out front of Parliament. There was no organisation. No one ordered them. There was no day of action. They were just at school. They were talking over lunch break, and they said, we really have to do something.
Yeah.
And they just came down to Parliament, and it was just so amazing to have a chat with them. And they were the most switched on, informed people.
Yeah.
And they had incredibly sensible things to say.
Absolutely. And this is the one mythology that I like to really delve into, because when people say that, you know, I have no life experience by virtue of being 24, I really have to ask, what do we actually mean when we talk about life experience? Is it that you get some cookies, like as you get older, and this magic life experience juju just accumulates and you're wise, and then you get a wizard hat? And I don't know. And I feel as though,
But I think the reverse happens.
Yeah.
I think people sort of like ossify and they get more rigid.
Well, that's
and
exactly
actually societal norms actually influence people. So
massively.
What we have to do in this point of time, like we've talked about climate change and a climate emergency and the problems in our society, we need some big bold thinking to address these things.
Yeah.
We actually need people to think about different futures.
Totally. And I was actually having this discussion the other day with somebody about how they were saying that, you know, it's young and naive people who tend to lean left in politics, and older people who are responsible who tend to lean right. And I had to point them out to Jeanette Fitzsimons, but on top of that, and David Attenborough and Jane Goodall, but, you know, all wise, amazing people who we respect a lot in our society. But I think that it is, as you say, that, you know, when you're younger, you're a sponge and you're looking at things in the macro, and you do have more of an open mind. And absolutely, that does mean that your opinions can shift and change, but hopefully it means that you have more of an open mind because you haven't encountered what you perceive to be every possible version of events. So therefore you're open to novel experiences and new ways of dealing with things. And as you get older, you start to accumulate capital, you start to have kids, and you start to narrow your focus, for better or worse, and you go from this really macro view of looking at the world and your place in it to this quite narrow view, and you become a bigger fish in a small pond, and therefore have a misplaced sense of power or whatever.
Or even just like segueing back to the budget, the amount of times I read people saying, well, what's in it for me? Or journalists
that was Simon who said that.
No, it was Simon. That was his like top line message, which I think is so wrong.
It's so cynical!
What's in it for the country? What's in it for the planet?
Oh, mate, I was blown away by that, because the very point of government, the very institution of government, and the very point of society is about social contract and how we interact with each other. And the fact that we are investing in public transport, the fact that, you know, in an everyday world, that we can use banks, that we can use roads, whether it's in a car or on a bike or in public transport, the fact that you can buy something from a shop and know that it's going to be safe to consume if it's food, or that, you know, you have rights and the person who's selling it to you has responsibilities if it doesn't meet a certain standard. All of that is possible as a result of society which is upheld by laws and the work that is put through the budget that the government of the day does. That's the point.
And tax, and it's the rent you pay for your civilised society.
Tax! Oh my
we
lord!
probably can't get into it. I mean, this is the thing.
We can't get into it? Yes,
sure?
we can. Yes, we can.
But yeah, man, it's just like, this is the conversation though. It feels like so many people are scared of having it. That tax is actually good. It is part of being a civilised human being. And actually, some of us need to pay more of it.
But the thing about tax, and this is where I think it really frustrates me, because I feel as though what's happened is that a whole bunch of, and this is in very simplistic terms obviously, so I'll contextualise it with that, but in very simplistic terms, I think that a whole bunch of really wealthy people have invested a lot of money in influencing politicians and setting the narrative that increasing tax means that the middle classes are going to be the people who pay more for everything and their back pocket's going to be hit, which is not the case. What is going to happen is the people who are earning a disproportionate amount out of exploiting the majority of people are going to pay what's fair.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? You look around the world and there's homelessness, there's dirty rivers you can't swim in, like all the problems in society, and we think they're sort of like bugs or like flaws. They're features. They were designed by people with agendas to benefit them, and that's why I wish we had these big conversations, could have them, but also why we could have these conversations with evidence instead of just these attacks and criticising people.
Absolutely. Well, that's, to bring it full circle, the problem with GDP as a measure, right? We externalise things like costs to the environment, we externalize things like measures of homelessness, and we say that they do not matter, and we're not going to incorporate them into the way that we value or measure success as a society. But speaking to the point around design, Gareth, this is why I think it's really important. I got into a huge rant about it at the Climate Challenge conference in Wellington, and thanks to the kids who hosted me for that. But I was being asked, we were all of these politicians being asked on the panel why they blamed poor people, because frequently politicians cited that we couldn't act on climate change because it's going to impact poorer people, why they were blaming poor people for their own political inaction. And I had to just really get into it and say, actually, the problem is that we're currently blaming poor people for not being able to afford things like EVs, not being able to buy reusable cups and healthy organic food and all of that stuff, when instead what we should be doing is lifting the baseline and changing the default in society, as opposed to blaming poor people for buying the only thing they can afford.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with social justice and environmental justice.
And as politicians, I think we should take it on board that, successive governments just haven't provided those options. No. Like, take Wellington, our buses system's falling over.
Oh, Wellington.
In many regions there are no public transport options available. But I guess, maybe to wrap up, we've canvassed so much stuff, from drugs to the budget to defence spending to animal welfare. And then talk about these big macro issues and the way we discuss politics in New Zealand. Do you reckon we should do it again next week?
I mean, I think so. Gina's holding up this over here, and I can see there's a few people. Yeah, sorry, Gina.
Our little frame broke, so.
Yeah. But there's a few comments popping up there. We can't read them right now. I apologise. But would say that there seems to be somewhat engagement. So if you're keen for us to keep doing this, having said yarns. Yeah. Then let us know.
Thinking maybe every week we could talk about what's been happening, because often you can't actually see what's happening in Parliament or behind the scenes, and everyone's too busy actually to assiduously watch the news or read the newspaper. Yeah. So we thought we'd just present maybe some of the big things that caught our attention this week, talk about the things we're passionate about, and if you have any feedback for us, things you'd like to see us talk about, or things you just like to know.
Or what was a bit shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, we were throwing out names and ideas for what this could be called if we do progress it. And one of the ones that came out was Answer Time, which is funny because it's the opposite of Question Time, and also politicians next to never actually answer questions. But also Damo pointed out, Damo is one of the awesome people who works in our creative team in Parliament for the Greens, pointed out that it sounds a lot like a kids show. And that got me thinking about Susie Cato. So I feel like we should sing It's Our Time on exit, but I'm not going to put you through that. So thanks for joining us.
It's Answer Time.
It's a love fun.
Yeah, catch you next week.
Yes, okay.